We're obviously very conscious of ensuring our component, albeit small, of an end consumer's electricity bill is kept as low as possible. As you will see on the graph here, and you will have seen this slide before, through the 1990s and early 2000s, transmission prices decreased in real terms as there was little new investment in the grid. As a result, charges went from being just over 15% of a typical homeowner's bill to about 9%. And interestingly, that's where it sits today following completion of our major build program. Over the last few years, we have seen an increase in transmission prices due to the investment that was required to bring the grid to a level that would meet consumer demand. We spent about $2 billion over the last 5 years in order to do this, and the cost was obviously recovered through transmission pricing, which was approved and allowed by the Commerce Commission. As you can see from the 2014-2015 point on this graph, with the last of our capital investment projects now completed, this year should be the final year of any increase reflecting the cost of those major projects. Our forecasts going forward, best indication we have at the moment indicates that transmission revenue should remain largely flat or indeed slightly less than inflation for the next 5 years. We've also been working with the Electricity Authority and the industry to develop a number of small changes to the transmission pricing methodology to address some inefficiencies in the current pricing arrangement. We aim to have these improvements in place by September 2015 to encourage more efficient use of the grid without materially changing who pays for transmission. It's important to note that this process is completely separate from the larger and more significant program of work that the authority is undertaking around the transmission pricing methodology. Transpower works within regulatory control periods as part of the framework set by the Commerce Commission, and that covers all our regulated costs and activities, with the exception of the system operator that is funded by a contract we have with the Electricity Authority. Our first regulatory control period, RCP1, ends on the 30th of June next year. And we're currently working through a process with the Commerce Commission to set our capital and operating expenditure targets for the second regulatory control period, RCP2, which runs from the 1st of July 2015 through to 2020. RCP2 will include new customer performance targets, where a portion of our revenue is in fact linked directly to the level of service we provide our customers over the period. On the topic of finance and regulatory approvals, it seems like a good time to hand over to Howard Cattermole, our Chief Operating Officer, to talk through in more detail our financial performance.
So I'll talk in a little bit more detail about the financial results and also give you a little bit of an insight into the outlook for financial performance into RCP2. So firstly, to look in a little more detail at the income statement. So as Mark mentioned, we had a significant increase again in transmission revenue, which was the main driver of an increase in total operating revenue of 9%. In conjunction with that, operating expenditure was actually down by 3%, and included in there, in terms of our controllable operating expenditure, that was down a little under 2%. As a consequence of those two factors, we saw healthy growth in EBITDAF, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortisation, impairments, and net movements in the fair value of financial instruments, for those that are not familiar. That was up 15% at $717 million. Below that, as Mark mentioned, we've seen significant increase in depreciation, amortisation, and particularly write-offs this year, up 23%, and write-offs in particular increased from $17 million last year to $34 million in the current year, in 13-14, which included the write-off of control systems and software associated with Pole 2. In addition, finance expenses were also significantly up. That's a function of increasing levels of debt as we fund the capital program, but also a significant reduction in the level of capitalised interest, which has been quite marked over the last few years with the large projects we've had in construction, but now with the completion of those projects, there's much less capitalisation of interest, which is therefore flowing through into the income statement. So taking all those things together, net profit after tax before movements in the fair value of financial instruments down 9% at 184 million versus 202 last year. And just to re-emphasise what Mark said, this is based on continuing operations, so strips out the effect of the sale of Decipher Trade, which was in last year's figures. Just to look in a little more detail now at that profit breakdown. So, as you're probably aware, given Transpower's highly regulated activities, our revenue is effectively set by a series of building blocks that are determined principally by the Commerce Commission in the way that it determines our transmission revenue, but effectively the same concept and building blocks are also used by the Electricity Commission in setting our system operator revenue. And what this graph does is just shows the breakdown or the disposition of our revenue in the year between those building blocks. So you can see there operating expenditure, depreciation, which is providing a return on or of capital over time as the assets are consumed, finance costs, which is obviously providing a return to the providers of debt capital to Transpower, and allowance for taxation, which leaves net profit after tax 184 million, and that's effectively the return to the shareholder from which we can fund dividends to the Crown. The important point here is that the level of return that's available to the shareholder is driven by the rate of return that's set by the regulator in determining our transmission revenue, and that's the principal driver of that return on shareholders' equity and the dividends that we can pay back to the Crown. Important when you're thinking about Transpower's financial performance, and to put it in context, is to think about the capital expenditure profile. Last year we spent just over 500 million on capex. You'll see that's been falling quite steadily over the last couple of years as we come to the conclusion of the major capital projects. So shown here, the major projects are the North Island Grid upgrade, the Nairn project, the North Auckland and Northland project that Mark referred to, and the HVDC upgrade, and they contributed, or cost I should say, about $2 billion over that 5-year period, and gave rise to that significant peak in our capital expenditure over that period. Looking forward, and these projections are based on the proposals that we made to the Commerce Commission back in December 2013 of our requirements, or our requests for capital allowances in the next regulatory period. We expect capital expenditure to be around $400 million per annum on average over that 5-year period, predominantly on refurbishment and replacement rather than greenfield investments that we've had through the period of major capital investment.